What's going on, everybody? Johnny Bannon here with Trepid Technologies, and in today's video we're going to be going over REST APIs. I know what you're thinking, isn't this a networking course? Routing, switching. It is, but in the future of network engineers, we need to know a little bit of programming. We need to understand HTTP, and we have to understand APIs. Because in our software-defined networks, REST APIs and RESTconf and netconf APIs are common. That's what you're going to be using when you're interacting with the DNA Center. And in this video, that's exactly what we're going to do. So the first half of this video, we're going to explain what an API is, specifically a REST API. We're going to go over the acronym CRUD. We're going to go over the different types of REST methods, HTTP methods. And then we're going to jump into the slides. So I'm going to do a demonstration on a whiteboard. Then we're going to jump into the slides just to make sure we didn't miss anything, just that fine print that we may need for the exam. And then we're going to go straight into a demonstration. For the demonstration, and I'll put links in the description below, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code, Postman, and then Cisco's DevNet Sandbox. And I'm going to be using their Getting Started guide on DNA Center. So I'm going to show you how to send a REST API from an application called Postman, which makes it really easy. And the whole point of Postman is just to send APIs. And then you can also use it to convert it to any language you want. So I'm going to show you that as well. And then I'm going to show you how to do a REST API call using Python from my Visual Studio Code. I'm going to open up a terminal, and we're going to run the Python scripts that I'll be making for you live on this video. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So first, let me just get rid of my face here. Okay. So again, with the slides, we're going to go over REST APIs here. And on the agenda, we're going to do an API overview. We're going to go over the acronym CRUD. And then we're going to go over HTTP, the end-to-end communication, just a brief overview, hit our REST methods again, and then straight into the demonstration. Okay, so I'm going to bring up this whiteboard here, and we are going to go over basic API overview and then also a REST API. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what is an API. So again, that's an application programmable interface. I'm not going to write that up here. There's really no need. So what does it do? It allows two different pieces of software or applications to retrieve data or information from each other, or more specifically, the server. So imagine we have two applications here, or a server-client architecture, or two pieces of software, whatever they may be. And we'll say this is the client. We'll put client here. And this client needs to get information from this piece of software, this application over here. Well, if this client is written in JavaScript, and then this server, we'll put server, is written in Python, how can they communicate? They're two different languages. How can I get information from the database that's going to sit on this backend server or resource here? So this would also be called the back end, right? So our client facing front end needs to retrieve data from our back end, and that back end is using Python as the language, and it's connected to our database here, which has all the information about whatever website we're hosting, right? Our customers, our products, whatever that may be. Since they're not the same language, we can build what's called an API endpoint here that exposes information from our database. And if we send a GET request, or just we'll get into what that acronym is, or a request, this server can then send that information being requested in a language they both, or a notation they both understand, using something called JSON. And if you're watching these videos in order, if you're in our CCNA course, JSON, we just did a whole 30-minute video on it. It stands for JavaScript Object Notation. All it is just really text ordered in key value pairs that lets you, it's just an array of information, right? It's how we can share information that all languages understand. So again, in JSON, we have what's called key value pairs. So even though it stands for JavaScript Object Notation, all of our languages understand it. And we're going to send that information that was requested back to the client using JSON. So that is the basics of an API. And again, this API endpoint, whether it's private or public, will be exposing information from our database here, okay? Now, let's redraw this and go over REST. So now let's go over a REST API. So I believe REST stands for Representational State Transfer. And again, we're going to go into the slides just to make sure that's what it means. And REST APIs use HTTP methods or methods called GET, POST, PUT, and DELETE. And then they also have other methods like the patch method, the option method, and the head method. Now, we're not going to get into these three down here because on the CCNA exam, there's no need. We won't need to. These correlate to an acronym called CRUD. CRUD is everything that you would do to a database. So remember, the whole point of an API is to get information from a separated database. We're going to get into why the database is separate and why you would need to talk to the back-end server to get information about a database. You know, why wouldn't you just, as the client, connect straight to the database? So we'll get into that. So anyways, CRUD, an acronym you need to understand for the CCNA exam. This stands for C is create. And again, this is actions that you would take against a database. That's what this acronym is for. You could use this acronym for different types of APIs as well. You may need to read information. You may need to update information. And you may need to delete information. So now if we correlate that with our REST API methods or HTTP methods, create is going to equal post. Read is going to equal get. Update is going to equal put. And then delete is going to equal delete. Now, this is something you will need to memorize. So let's go over this. So let me get a different color going here. So what does post do in our REST API? It creates a new resource. It creates a new resource. So what do we mean by that? Well, let's say again we have our front end here, our JS front end, our Python back end, and then we have our database, which has all the information about our application. So let's just say this app I built, this website, or this web application I built, just lists my favorite restaurants. So I categorize them in like ethnicity or nationality, so Mexican, Italian, American, Asian. So let's say this front end client here, I'm going to put front, needs to create a new resource. So my restaurant may be, or my web application may be favfood.com/restaurants/ and then this ID here will be the different types. If I want to send a post request, meaning I want to create a new resource, I won't be going to this URL. Now, why is that? That's because that's just retrieving, let's say, HTML. If I type this in on my web browser and hit enter, this will display the actual web page. But I want to get to the actual resource in the database. So if I'm doing a post request, I would be making a call to something like this. Let me change my color back to black here. To either a subdomain of this website called API, favfood.com, and then that'd be /restaurant/ and then let's say I want to add Greek to the list. That would be my post request because I'm adding that resource. Or instead of it being an entire subdomain, we could just have a separate directory. So we keep our APIs that we're going to expose, which again allows us to interact with the database from a client front end to back end. They can either be a whole subdomain, right? There's a sub and then the real domain. Or it could just be a separate directory. So it could be favefood.com/API/restaurants/ and then Greek. And then the ID in the database will probably just be like a number, right? So the actual ID will be like a 2 or a 3 or a 4. So that's a post request. Now, a GET request, that's going to be retrieving information. We're just going to retrieve information. So retrieve data/resource from the database. So now this could just be, let's get a list of all the restaurants we want, or this could be anything. This could be an authorization token that we may need, and we can do a GET request for that. I bring that up because that's going to be in our demonstration. Now delete, I don't think I really need to, this one's always the easiest to explain. Delete just means deleting or removing a resource. Okay, now the last one I'm going over is put, and there's a reason. Because put is a little special. We need to know this for our exam. A put request just changes or again updates. Actually, let me just make sure this is clean in case you're taking notes. Updates a resource. So what do we mean by that? So let's say I send 10 post requests for Greek. What a post request does is it creates every single time. So if I send 10 post requests for Greek, guess what? I'm going to get 10 new resources and new IDs over here in my database. But with put, it doesn't actually create new resources. We call this idempotent. I think that's what that means. I don't know how to say it correctly, but idempotent. What that means is that resource will never be changed will never be created anew in the database. So if I'm sending a put request to this resource Greek and its ID is 2, and I'm making all sorts of changes to it, it's that the changes will take, but in the database, we're not going to create new resources like we would with post. Okay? So that is the HTTP and REST API method you'll have to learn. You have to understand the differences. Now for delete and get, I feel like they're pretty self-explanatory. Delete means you delete or remove a resource. Get is you retrieve data or a resource. Post creates I'm going to put this here, a whole new resource. And put just updates that resource. Now just a quickly to go over patch, because you may see this. Patch also updates a resource, but it may just update a certain piece of that resource. So if I have this object or this ID, Greek here, and then underneath it, I have little attributes for it. So Greek, let's just say tzatziki sauce, right? What else is Greek food? I'm blanking here. Anyways, there could be other things, attributes with the Greek food, and I just want to change this to tzatziki sauce because I misspelled it here. I can send a patch request, and that'll just update that little attribute or sub-object or nested object in this object, Greek, okay? So now let's clear this off again, and let's go over security. Let's go over why it's architectured like this. Why do we have essentially 3 pieces of this puzzle? Why do we have a front end in JS? Well, because JS is usually just a very common front-end language, right, that interacts with our back-end. And then we have this Python back-end. Put back, front, and then we have a database that's also separated from this back-end. Why do we have all this separation? Why couldn't we just make a direct call to this database? Well, because if we allowed that, that means anybody on the client side, remember this is the client side, could be affecting our database, and we don't want that. If it's SQL, they could just do drop database, right? We don't want direct connections. We want control to expose what we want to expose. So what does this give us? One, security. This gives us security. But two, it also gives us something called modularity. So let's say my restaurant web application took off, and now people want an actual app on their phone. They're tired of going to the mobile web client, right? They don't like it. They want an application. Well, would I make a whole new server with a whole new database? No. I'm going to use that same database information, whether or not I have this website connecting to it or I have this mobile app. This is my iPhone here that's coded in Swift. And let's say this does a post request to this database, or excuse me, a post request to this backend server on one of our API endpoints. Well, the data that was changed in this post request, or maybe it was changed in a put request, will also be the same data that this website could be retrieving. Now, you may be saying, okay, so you make these APIs, you make these API endpoints that expose information from the database. Well, does that mean anybody that just downloads Postman can just access your APIs? Well, that depends. We can also establish authentication, so we can have like OAuth 2.0 that needs to be configured and established before you can make API or requests. Or we could just have straight up private APIs that are for our internal team that they get access to and the tokens to. And then we can also have public APIs. So let's say, for example, I have this website with all my favorite restaurants, and someone out there is like, I don't like the way they're exposing this data on their front end. I think their front end design is crappy. Well, I can make API calls here to my front end, and now I can render my own website using information from this database that I can access on the public APIs. All right. So I think that's going to be it as far as us just diving deep and doing a quick overview of APIs. Now let's head to our PowerPoint and make sure we didn't miss anything. And again, I'm going to go through this rather quickly because if you can memorize what I just taught you, you'll be just fine. The only thing I didn't hit on was the HTTP codes, status codes. Because remember, with these REST APIs, it uses HTTP. So we could send a GET request and we could get a 404 error code. You got to understand what these codes mean. So we're definitely going to hit on that. Okay, so API overview. So just a quick, again, overview of what they do. APIs act as an intermediaries between different software components. They enable one application to request services or data from another application or system. APIs provide an abstraction layer, hiding the complex internal details of a system or service. Again, that is us separating that backend website, the backend of that web server, to the database to have that separation. And then standardization. APIs are typically well documented and follow specific conventions and standards. And of course, another form of standardization, they use JSON to send that information from the database. So a standard notation or a way to read information that all languages can use. Functionality. So APIs can expose a wide range of functionality, such as retrieving data, sending data, performing actions, and more. They also provide security. So typically, if it's not just a total public API, if you're actually going to be interacting with the database, they're going to require some form of authentication and authorization, like OAuth. And then APIs are used in all sorts of contexts. Web development, mobile app development, cloud computing, Internet of Things. APIs are used everywhere. If you use single sign-on to log into the Trepa Tech site using Google, guess what? That's an API call. We had to set up APIs to use the authentication authorization services of Google. Again, going over that CRUD acronym. So something we have to understand, right? So CRUD, that is the create operation, and that involves adding new data or records to a database or system. That correlates to post. Remember that. That is a post request for our REST/HTTP methods. All right? Read. So the R in CRUD is read. The read operation involves retrieving or reading existing data from the database. In our REST or HTTP methods, that's a GET request, and you'll get a GET response from the database. Update. So the update operation involves modifying or updating existing data in a database system. So that typically corresponds to the action of changing values in the database. And our REST or HTTP method for that is a put method. And then last but not least, the easy one is delete. So the delete operation involves removing data or records from a database or system. And just something I want to point out here. So here's the only one where I put like a response. Since we're using HTTP, you're always going to get a response though. Just because you send a put method, you may not get a put like response, but you'll get an HTTP response with a code that says, yes, this action was performed. Like 200 code. We're about to get into that right now. Okay, so the HTTP request. So the client constructs an HTTP request message that includes several components. So in the actual HTTP header, that's what we're talking about here. One, you're going to have the HTTP method. And look at those. Get, post, put, delete. That's going to indicate the desired action to be performed on the resource. And then we have request headers. So this is going to include metadata about the request. So a lot of times this is like JSON. So in the request header, we can say accept equals JSON. Then the request body, this is actually going to contain data or content to be sent to the server. So with a post or put request that we're adding to the database, we're actually going to have a payload. And that's because in the post or put, again, we're sending information to the database. Now with the GET request, of course, we're not going to have a payload because we're trying to retrieve information. So in the response, then we'll have a payload. And we're about to get into that. Before we move on, again, I just want to show another little diagram of if we have this verb here or that method, it could be accessing this URI here, alpha. And essentially what that means, if we look at our URL down here, is that we're specifically trying to retrieve data from this uniformed resource indicator. So this will be our scheme of how we're doing it. Our authority, which just means our domain name. And then our path, okay? So this is our path to the resource we're trying to either access or push data to or change. Okay, so in this version down here, we have the network device part of our DNA center. You can see it's part of that API subdirectory. It's going to be pretty cool. That's actually the URL we're going to use when we actually retrieve data, do a GET request from a DNA center in our Cisco DevNet sandbox. Now let's go over the HTTP response. So the server's response to an HTTP request is always going to include a status code. This status code will indicate if the request has failed or succeeded. So what you're going to want to know here is just the first letter, and there's other codes. There's like 200, 201, 404. We're not going to write those out specifically. They easily can be Googled, but for the exam, we just need to know what this first digit means. You got to memorize this. So if it's a 1, that's informational, meaning that the server received a request, but it's still processing something with that request. If it's a 2, that means the request was successfully received, understood, and accepted. So for example, if that's a post request and we got a 200 or a 201 response, that means, hey, good to go, that change has been done. A 3, that's a redirection. So that just means further action needs to be taken. And then 4 and 5 is what you need to be aware of. So essentially, like, what you really need to know, real world, as a network automator, I think, just from the basics, is 200. that equals okay. If you get a 4 or 5, that equals failed. And what's important is know the distinction. So if it's a client error, that means your request was bad and it cannot be fulfilled. If it was a 5 error, that means the server failed to fulfill an apparently valid request. That means it may be something on the server side or maybe the distant end, right? Or maybe you need to look into something on the DNA center that you're trying to do the REST API call to. Okay, and I think we're going to be done with the slides here. We're going to move into the demonstration. Again, you just need to memorize these REST methods. I put the 5 up here. There's other ones like option and head, but we have get, which again is retrieve. And my text is disappearing, and that's because, hold on, we got to fix something right here. So again, that is retrieve. Post is a new or create a new resource. Put is an update or change. Delete, guess what that means? Delete. And then of course patch is also update and change, but it's more specific. So I'm going to write that on there. It can get into like the nested objects and stuff like that. Okay, guys. Now let's get into our demonstration. So I'm going to quickly pause this video while I get VS Code set up and the things we're going to use for our demonstration. Okay, so here's what we have right now, guys. We have Cisco DevNet resource. So what we're looking at here is the DevNet sandbox, and here it lets us use any of their DevNet resources or labs. It's pretty awesome. So I showed this in our last video, actually. I think maybe the JSON one, the one prior, where we can actually go into this DNA center here and get hands-on with the DNA center. And guess what? It's always on. So I'm going to click that. And you can see it puts us right into this sandbox environment where this DNA center has onboarded 4 switches, and then it has public internet access. For my actual demonstration, I am going to follow this getting started guide. So this is essentially going to show us how we can use Postman to make REST calls against a Cisco DNA Center appliance. So this is pretty cool. So we're going to do a post request and we're going to do a get request following this. So I don't want you guys to think, man, he just memorized all this. He's a genius. No, we're just going over this how-to guide and getting you familiar with Postman. Now I'm going to bring this off to the side here onto my other monitor. Now, if we look at Postman, so I'm going to bring this into view. Make sure that this covers our entire screen. Just give me 1 second while I adjust this. Okay. So Postman, what this is going to do is allow us to make API calls using this application. So instead of us actually coding the API request ourselves, we can just use Postman here. And you can see here, I'm in my environment where it lets us send these REST methods. See, it says type a new method. I like how it's getting the vernacular, the vocab correct. So what we're doing here, if I were to draw it out for you, is essentially from our local computer. So I'm just going to do this. There is a DNA center out here in the internet. Put DNA, and we're actually going to send a post request and a get request to that DNA center, and it's going to feed us back information. So it's going to be pretty cool, guys. And again, this is all free from Cisco, and we're going to use the Cisco's Getting Started guide to help us. So the first thing we're going to have to do is, again, install Postman if you haven't, and we're going to have to generate what's called an authorization token. This authorization token that we're going to generate is going to allow us to actually do get requests to our distant end or our DNA center. So if you haven't installed Postman, it's real easy. Just go on Google, type in install Postman, and you'll be good to go. And then what we're going to do here, the first thing, is we're going to come here to settings, and we're going to set the SSL certificate verification off. Essentially, this is going to be an HTTPS website. So we don't want to actually do that SSL verification because, well, it's just lab, right? We don't want it. We don't need it. It's going to mess us up and add in some complexity that we just don't need. Next, we're going to get an authorization token, because without this authorization token, we will not be able to actually make GET requests to our DevNet environment or to our DNA center. So here's how we're going to do this. One, we're going to set this to post. So why are we doing a post request if we're getting a token? Well, it's kind of the wrong way to describe it. We're not getting a token, we're generating a token. So we're going to generate a token and send it to the DNA Center database so that we can be authorized, okay? Now, and then we're going to put that authorization token in our HTTP headers for our GET request so we can be authorized. So the first thing we have to do is get our URL. So that's going to be HTTPS. And then I already have it here, but again, it's going to be on the website on this getting started guide. I'll bring that quickly back into view. So it's going to be sandbox dnac dnacenter.cisco.com/DNA API and then auth and token. So that is our URL that we're going to use. And then we're going to go down here to authorization. So we're going to type in here basic auth. So if we want to generate a token, we first need to still be authorized and authenticated. So we're going to use this username and password that is allowed on this DNA Center, saying, hey, this is a username and password that can be used to authenticate to us. And then once we have that, I just want to show you quickly here also the actual code in Python. And we're actually going to do this ourselves as well. And then once we have everything set, we're going to hit send. And then you see our response down here. So now this is the token that we're going to use in the future when we do our GET request. So I'm showing you how easy it is with Postman. When we get into the actual terminal, it ain't going to be that easy. It's going to be fun though. Now, let's say we want to get some information from our network devices. So if I bring this back into view here, remember this DNA Center is onboarded these switches. So if I want to know something about these switches without actually going to the DNA Center GUI, for some reason I just want to gather the information about maybe an interface or an IP address, I can do a GET request. Now, back to Postman. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put a new URL in here. And we're going to change this to GET. Because we're not pushing information, now we just want to receive information. We want to learn about the network devices, okay? And that's going to be like an object in DNA Center. So before we do that, we're going to copy this token. And look what I'm copying, guys. I'm just copying the actual token field here, not this key, just the actual value here without the quotations. And I'm going to go into headers. And down here, I'm going to say this is an X auth. Let's see. X auth token. It should just pop up. I don't like when it does. Oh, capital A. Okay. X auth token. And then I'm going to paste that value into it. So I'm going to paste that in. And now we should be able to do our GET request. Now you see here this status, that was from our old post request 200 code. So that means okay, right? So now let's send this and look at this. We got our response. So we're looking at this catalyst switch here and look at this formatted in JSON so pretty. We're getting all the information about our device. And this looks like just a show description, right? No. What's the command? Wow. I can't believe I'm forgetting the actual CLI command that shows us all this information. That's okay. I'll put it in the edit. It's going to pop up on the screen. But this is showing us all our device information. All right. Now, let's go ahead and look at this on VS Code. So I'm going to minimize Postman here. So now, let's go ahead and code this by hand. So I'm going to make sure that this is good and in view. All right. All right. So now, guys, now let's actually code this by hand. So remember the process we did. First, we did a post request to get a token, and then we did a GET request to get information about our network devices. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit Control N, start a new file, and I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it under my username here. So the path will be users, my username, and then I'm going to say generate token.python. And then I'm going to open up a terminal here. So I'm going to open up a terminal here. And if I don't have my environment set up, I'll need to install something called request using pip3. So it's like a Python installer. And then I'm going to import some stuff here. So first I'm going to import request. So this is the REST API library for Python. This is how we do GET and POST request. To actually do a POST request to our DNA center, we needed to authenticate and authorize first. You remember how we did that on Postman? We had to put in a username and password. So what I'm going to have to do here is also import from request.auth, which is just another library or function within that request library. I'm going to import basic authentication because that's what it was. It was basic authentication. And now I'm going to create some variables. So I'm going to say the username is devnet user. And again, remember, I'm getting this information from the Getting Started guide. Then I'm going to say password. I'm going to set the password as a variable. It's going to be Cisco123. And no, guys, this is not best security practice, leaving just this stuff in plain text. And then I'm going to set the URL that we're going to be doing the request to as a variable as well. And that's going to be, I'm just grabbing it from Postman on my other screen here. Remember, to generate the token, it was this auth token URI. And now I'm going to set the authentication variable. So this is going to be the variable that we use when we want to pass the authentication. I'm going to use this HTTP basic auth function. And I'm going to go our username variable to set the username that's going to pass. And then our password variable. And remember, that was set up here. Now, let's actually do the POST request. So I'm going to do the response. I'm going to set the response variable to request.post. And then I'm going to pass in these variables here. So URL and then also auth equals auth. So in there, we had to set the type of authentication or authorization, and we set it to our variable that we had up here. All right. And then we're going to do some logic here. So I want to get this token, but I want our output to look clean. So I'm going to do a little if logic. So I'm going to say if response.statuscode equals 200, which again means okay. Let's print request was most excellent. Make sure my spelling's good here. Then we're going to print response data. Remember, these are all strings as well with a colon. And then with no space, we're going to do print response.text. Remember, so what we're saying here is if the status code from our request is okay, we're going to print this right here. And this response.text is going to be this variable here. And again, we're trying to get this token. And then we're going to do else print request failed with status code. And then we're going to put, don't need that extra apostrophe here, comma, response, status code, print request. I'm just getting this red text on. Else print request failed with status code, colon, comma, response dot status underscore code. Don't know why I'm getting the red there. It should be good, but that's okay. Okay, now we're good to go. I just had to change this right here to the actual double quotations, and now we're good. So now, guys, to actually run this, just to quickly get our environment set up, let's look right here. There's our path. So we're going to type in Python 3 and then generate token. And look at that. So request was most excellent. Here's our response data. So we're going to leave that here under our terminal. And then we're going to open up a new file. We're going to save this as get device info.py, which means Python. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do that GET request. So again, we're going to import the request library. We're going to import JSON this time. We don't have, but I want to format it in JSON. We're going to set our URL variable again, and I'm going to take this from Postman. So remember, this isn't the auth token URI. Now we're getting into the network device URI. So actually looking at information about our network devices. I'm going to set the payload here to empty brackets. And then look, I'm red again. I wonder why. Am I doing something wrong here? We'll just keep going. And then we're going to put headers. It'll tell us an error. I can just pause the video. And then I'm going to get that token. So what we're going to click here is this token. So it's going to be X auth dash token. And then we're going to grab this right here. And we're going to actually, we do need to put this in the quotations. Put that back, hit enter, okay. And then we're going to do authorization, colon, and then we're going to put basic. And guys, what we're going to actually do here is we're going to go back to Postman. And we're going to get that from our first GET request. So we're just going to copy that right there. All right. And now what we're going to do is type in response equals request.get. And then we're going to do print response.json. And then again, we're going to come down here to our terminal. And now we're going to come down here again and type in Python 3. And then we're going to put get device info. So we actually got to make it more specific. Get device info. And look at that. Now we have that information in JSON again. And since this isn't a coding course, we're not going to go over how to make this pretty. But that is it, guys. So I just looked at our time. It's 42 minutes. So I may cut this video up. That seems super long. But that's okay. This was a good video getting into REST APIs, going over some examples, and going over what it is. All right. So I want to thank everyone for viewing. And if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you're an active duty soldier looking to get some in-person, live, virtual, or self-paced training course full of questions, Q&A, discussions with our team, access to our Discord, click that link in the description below and see how you can apply for Army credentialing assistance. And if your unit is looking for in-person training, see how we can get out to your unit. We would love to walk you through the micro purchase form and get us out there to get you tested and certified. Thank you for watching.